Hello, this is The Legal Line. I'm Locke Meredith. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're very privileged and honored to have with us Judge Bob Downing. He's a judge with the First Circuit Court of Appeal. Thank you, Judge, for being here.
Glad to be here, Locke.
Judge, I've always wanted to do this. For the record, please give us your full name and address.
I'm Bob Downing, 1600 North 3rd Street, Baton Rouge, where the old lady of the lake is. I was born right there on that very spot where the old lady of the lake was.
Judge, tell us about
when
yourself.
The lady of the lake was next to a lake.
Very good.
You know, they ought to have a lake there. I'm surprised they hadn't built one.
Tell us about yourself, your educational background, and kind of what you've done as a judge.
Well, it depends. During campaigns, I tell people I'm from Brownsfield when I'm in that area. Went to Baker to the 10th grade, so I'm from Baker during that area, if I'm in that area. I graduated from Zachary, so I'm a Zachary High graduate. If I'm in Central, I'm a North Baton Rouge native. So that's
been all
how
over.
It goes. All over Baton Rouge. I'm one of the few Baton Rouge natives you'll actually meet.
Now, you practiced law for how long?
10 years, and then I've been a district court judge for 15 years.
And that was in the 19th Judicial District Court?
Right.
Which is here in Baton Rouge?
Correct.
And then you were elected to the First Circuit Court of Appeal?
Right.
When was that?
January 1st, 2001.
And how you like that?
It's very quiet there. I feel like a monk in a scriptorium. I'm always reading and writing.
I want to talk to you a little bit because I know that you're a bit of a history buff and familiar with the groundings of the Constitution and the forefathers. I want to ask you a little bit about those documents and put it in the context of what we're experiencing today with the horrible events that occurred on September 11th with the bombing of the Twin Towers. Tell me your thoughts about all of this. We're seeing a lot of praying now, and a lot of people hear about you can't pray in school, you can't pray in the governmental buildings, you can't do this, but we're seeing our nation come together in faith with God. So give me your perspective on all this.
It's unusual. You haven't seen the ACLU say a thing about the president having a National Day of Prayer. And apparently George Washington didn't know about separation of church and state because he would declare national days of prayer, national days of fasting if things went wrong, national days of thanksgiving when things went right. In his farewell address, he says religion and morality are the twin pillars of this country, and if anybody subverts them, they cannot call themselves a patriot.
In fact, I heard that he prayed and read the Bible every single day for hours at a time.
Our history is being rewritten. You will find people that say George Washington was a deist, and a deist is someone who does not believe in Jesus. He believes in God, the great clockmaker, the God that started everything but doesn't actually answer prayers. Which is odd since George Washington accounted for his successes because of prayer and God's intervention. But they say he was a deist. He was also a vestryman in the Episcopal Church. His adopted daughter, Martha Custis, said he had a prayer life every day, studied the Bible every day. I had a discussion with one of the editors of the newspaper who said he was a deist, and I said, tell me a single person who knew George Washington when he was alive that said he was a deist. And then I recounted all these other facts, and he said, well, nobody that knew him when he was alive said he was a deist, but obviously he didn't use the words Jesus Christ in his public speeches, therefore he was a deist, which would not hold up in court anywhere. But it is repeated so often that people believe it. I saw something in the paper recently about the Unitarians on the little column, and it said John Quincy Adams was a Unitarian. Well, John Quincy Adams was not a Unitarian. He gave a speech on July 4th, 1837, talks about Jesus and how the birth of the nation and the birth of the Savior coincide, and that America is the city on the hill spoken about in the Bible. So that's totally untrue.
And George Washington is the man that is called the father of our nation.
Right.
And these other fellows you're talking about are the forefathers, the guys who constructed the Constitution.
Correct. Now, in 1962, the Supreme Court suddenly discovered separation of church and state in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Bible Association. The only problem with that...
Let me interrupt you real quick. This separation of church and state, is it in the Constitution?
Absolutely not. It's only found in the letter that Jefferson wrote the Danbury Baptist Association. The Baptists were worried about there being a national religion. They had heard that the Congregationalists or the Episcopalians were going to try to establish a national religion, and they were concerned about that. And Jefferson said no. Now, Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention. He was actually ambassador to France. one of the things passed in the same session of Congress that passed the Bill of Rights is the Northwest Ordinance. It was passed under the Articles of Confederation and was how the Northwestern Territory got to become states, Ohio and those areas. It was repassed in the same session of Congress like a month after the Bill of Rights. And Article 3 says, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for good government, schools should be established. What was the purpose of schools? Religion, morality, and knowledge. Now, if they meant the First Amendment to mean you couldn't, separation of church and state, and you couldn't teach religion in schools, why would they repass the Northwest Ordinance?
It's interesting. I went to D.C. with my oldest son Colin's class about 6 months ago and walked into all the great monuments, all the great buildings, the Library of Congress, the Supreme Court. And in every single building, on most every wall, there's some type of mural or sculpture that clearly shows that our nation is tied to faith in God.
Well, in the rotunda of the Capitol, they have the Pilgrims embarking, and they have the Geneva Bible. They have Columbus praying when they discovered America. They have the baptism of Pocahontas. If you watch the Disney movie, you think Pocahontas was this great nature lover, but she became a Christian and was baptized, which is taken out of the history books now. It's amazing that we used to make fun of the Russians for changing history. They would rewrite their history. We're rewriting the history now. I noticed recently, 1963 encyclopedia. Florence Nightingale is quoted as saying, now she founded modern nursing, totally modernized nursing. She said, and this is in her diary, in quotes in the encyclopedia, at age 16, God spoke to me and called me into his service. 1983, same encyclopedia says, at age 16, she thought she heard from God. It's no longer in quotes. The 1993 encyclopedia says, at age 16, Florence Nightingale had a feeling she ought to help people.
So how did we get to this point?
Well, if you look at Douglas on the Supreme Court, he had a young girlfriend. He was a wild and crazy guy. He didn't want this to be true. So they actually rewrote history. And the textbooks had started earlier. For instance, Blackstone, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says the laws of nature and the laws of nature is God. We're told those are deist statements. And remember, deist is an impersonal God. Doesn't get involved. It did everything and is playing pinochle somewhere in the universe. If you look at Blackstone, and Blackstone lectured on the common law in England and wrote down all his notes in a big book, which came to the United States in the 1750s and was the only law book most American lawyers had. Section 39, you can go get a copy at Claytor's. It's kind of expensive, but big, thick book like that. But most of the thickness is the notes. The actual Blackstone's short. But he says the laws of nature are the laws God puts in effect, like the great clockmaker. And he says if man's reason was perfect, then that's all we'd need. We could discover God's laws from nature. He said, but everywhere we see since the fall of the first man that our reason is not perfect. Therefore, and then the next section, 40, says the laws of nature is God. God has had to reveal himself, and that's only found in the Holy Scripture, capital H, capital S.
So the bottom line is our forefathers, the father of this nation, and up until the 60s, our nation has been recognizing and acknowledging God and involving the biblical principles in application of law to this nation.
Right.
This isn't the first time that a president's called for a National Day of Prayer or mourning, as President Bush has. Thank you for being with us. This is The Legal Line with Locke. Hi, this is The Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, we're privileged to have with us today Judge Bob Downing. He's a judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge, thank you. We had just been talking about, on the last segment, the fact that our nation is replete with the history of recognizing and acknowledging God and involving the principles, biblical principles, in the basically governing of our nation. Would you agree?
Correct.
Tell me, how did we get to the point where people now are told, and school boards are told, and teachers are told that you can't pray in school, you can't have religious meetings in school, and yet our own Congress starts every session with a prayer. Our governmental monuments are replete with depictions of Christ and faith and the Bible and God.
Well, the Supreme Court started with the separation of church and state. They cited no precedents, and as you know, in legal cases, you're supposed to cite precedent. They cited no precedent.
Which is what?
A previous case. We're common law, where you cite previous cases for your authority. You have to have some authority for what you're doing. Right. They cited no cases. They simply cited this letter. Then they made it history, which is bad history. It's incorrect. Now, I got started looking at all this stuff in an argument with Judge Darrell White, who's now retired and works with Louisiana Family Forum. He kept telling me, all this stuff we've been talking about this morning. I said, that's not what I learned in school. I learned separation of church and state. All these guys were deists. And he said, well, just look at the documents. So he showed me some stuff from Wall Builders, and if you've got the internet, wallbuilders.com has the original documents, and you can look at them on the internet.
Now, what documents are we talking about?
The Northwest Ordinance, which I now have. I've never seen it before, never heard about it. Washington's Farewell Address, that used to be mandatory reading. Then they took it out completely. Then they put it back in, but the paragraph I quoted to you about religion and morality has been taken out of the textbooks. Now, I'm not in favor of forced prayer. I had a kid came to our school in junior high that was a Jehovah's Witness, and kids picked on him because he didn't say the prayer because Jesus said don't pray in public, and he didn't say the pledge because they believed that you shouldn't have any loyalty except to God. And kids picked on him unmercifully. So I've never been in favor of forced prayer. As a matter of fact, we would probably still have prayer in school if the principal had left Madeline Murray O'Hare's son alone. All he wanted to do was stand in the hall when they had the prayer. They forced him, and his mother filed suit, and the rest is history.
And that's the reason for the whole creation of this nation, was not to be forced.
Right. Although we have a history of the Pilgrims came here to have religious freedom, and then they wouldn't let anybody else practice religion. That's how Roger Williams ended up in Rhode Island. And he said forced religion stinks in the nostrils of God.
So there should not be, in your opinion, a national religion or faith.
No, that's clearly prohibited. But we have gone the other way. There are a lot of things we did that were probably wrong, forcing people to do things. We have gone the other way with this paranoia. Now, what we can do, and people will complain about not having prayer at school. They complain about what they can't do, but they won't do what they can do.
Which is what?
They can have, like, see you at the pole. They had that recently. You can meet around the flagpole, pray for your school. Ronald Reagan in 1984 got the Equal Access Law passed that says if you allow any non-curriculum related club in a public school, you have to allow Bible studies and prayer groups. You can't discriminate against Bible studies.
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity. The Supreme Court said that was constitutional. Well, we tried to have a meeting like at McKinley Middle. There are 30 churches around McKinley Middle. So we invited all the pastors, and the idea was, since it's a predominantly black school, to get the black kids in the neighborhood from all the different churches to meet together, greet the white kids, invite them to be in the Bible study and prayer group. Because a lot of those kids being bussed in are nervous about being the minority, and that's true whichever school is minority. Only 3 pastors showed up. One of them said, well, everybody's busy, we'll try to get it organized. Nothing happened. But when they tried to organize a gay club, Gay Straight Alliance at McKinley, all the pastors showed up. As soon as that controversy was over, they disappeared. Well, why aren't the pastors getting the youth in their church to cross denominational lines, cross racial lines, and have a voluntary Bible study and prayer group? Where are they? Where are the youth leaders?
So there is that ability.
There's absolutely. When you do reports, you can do a report on Florence Nightingale, talk about her faith. George Washington Carver. If you look at books, and you need to look at books before 1965, they've actually sanitized the God word out of the books. George Washington Carver, and I started collecting pre-1965 books. In the Random House Landmark Edition, 1950, George Washington Carver, his workshop is called God's Little Workshop. That was the name of his workshop. He says that he read the Bible and he knew that God made everything for a purpose. They knew God made him for a purpose. And he said he never really discovered anything. He would see something, he would pray about it, and God would reveal it to him.
So our kids can write reports about their faith.
Correct. You can have, there was a suit recently over the national motto that's on your coins.
In God we trust.
In God we trust. The ACLU sued this public official to make her get the national motto off the wall. Finally, now we've seen all this stupid stuff coming out of the courts. Finally, a court said, oh, you can have the national motto on the wall. You can almost book it in 10 years. Somebody's going to get the national motto off the coins. That was added in the middle of the Civil War when a pastor said, we need God on our side. When they started putting "In God We Trust" on the coins, we started winning battles in the Civil War. Eisenhower put "Under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. That was not in the Pledge of Allegiance until like 1953. Now, if it weren't for Eisenhower thought that God helped them win D-Day. If it weren't for Eisenhower, we could be speaking German. So if he thought God intervened, that's good enough for me.
You said in 10 years it's going to be off the wall.
It's getting politically incorrect. Right now you can put it on there.
How does the American people prevent that from happening, or can they? I mean, it seems like since the 60s, within 40 years, 150 years of history has been rewritten and actually is being changed.
We have been brainwashed to believe the history we're now told. And I was one of those people that got brainwashed. I argued with Darrell White that no, that's not what I learned in school. For instance, haven't you heard that religious wars have killed more people than anything else in history?
Sure.
Do you believe that to be true?
Frankly, I'm ignorant, so I don't know.
Everybody believes that to be true. If you add up all the religious wars in history, and think about this, Civil War, we lost 600,000 people. That was the biggest loss we had, more than World War I, World War II. The big wars in history were not religious. World War I, World War II, the Civil War, War of 1812, American Revolution, those are not religious wars. If you added up all the actual religious wars, the armies were small, you get 2 million people. If you weight it for the population, you could say 20 million maybe. Joseph Stalin, an atheist, in this century alone killed 35 million people. Mao Zedong, another atheist, in this century killed 45 million people. Pol Pot by himself, another atheist, killed 4 million. Then you add Castro and the others. Atheism has killed more people in less than 70 years than all the religious wars in history. 2 million versus over 80 million. And close to 90 or 100 million. But it is repeated so often that everybody believes it. It's like Hitler said, you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it.
Thank you for being with us. This is The Legal Line. I'm Locke Meredith. Welcome. This is The Legal Line. My name is Locke Meredith. We have again here with us Judge Bob Downing. He is a judge with the First Circuit Court of Appeal. Again, Judge, thank you.
Enjoy being here.
Judge, let's pick up where we left off, and that is what can be displayed by folks as it relates to faith-based items and objects?
Well, you can now display the national motto. An American Family Association sells a little poster with a flag on it, a national motto, and they recommend buying it for teachers, buying it for public officials. Matter of fact, I got to go get mine. I got it at the frame shop. I bought some extra copies and sent it to other people. You can display the 10 Commandments. All those cases, everybody thinks it ends with a period. You can't have the 10 Commandments in a courtroom. It doesn't end with a period. It ends with a comma. You can't have it if the jury can see it. You can't have it if it's the center of a display. You can have it if it's with, like, other legal documents. So if you have, in a school, you could put up the 10 Commandments with a display of the genesis, if you excuse that word, of our law. The 10 Commandments is the basis of our law. I had a discussion with somebody who said, well, the Code of Hammurabi and all that stuff. We didn't find the Code of Hammurabi till the late 1800s. So it couldn't have been the basis for, it was stuck in the sand in the desert. All these other legal codes, we didn't discover that until archaeology starts finding things in the late 1800s. We based our laws on the 10 Commandments. You can have the Northwest Ordinance. You can have the flag, the Washington's Cruisers flag that says an appeal to heaven. Now, I had it in different displays, and a lot of people made fun of it. What's all this stuff in the courtroom? Well, the reason I put it up there is because I had a class, about 200 kids from different schools on Law Day. Not one of them knew who Nathan Hale was. I regret that I had one life to give for my country. He was a teacher. That's why teachers used to teach Nathan Hale. Only 1 out of 7 teachers had heard of Nathan Hale. Nobody could get it. In Patrick Henry's speech, he said, give me liberty or give me death. It starts out, men cry, peace, peace, where there is no peace. That's a quote from Ezekiel. He got saved in the Great Awakening, and he was very religious. There The first book published in America was the Book of the Psalms. I had a display that had that first page of the Book of the Psalms. So there are all kinds of things like that. You can do reports on people like George Washington Carver, Clara Barton, Florence Nightingale, even George Washington, and give the original quotes. You can have George Washington's farewell address up there. Wall Builders has a number of posters of Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington that have quotes from them. Like Lincoln said, you need to learn the Bible. The Ascension Parish just started an elective Bible study course. The board was divided evenly, and the head of the board voted and broke it on having an elective. Now, we're talking about letting people choose to study the Bible, and it was controversial. Now, if Locke Meredith said, I don't want my kids to read Harry Potter, you would be considered an ignorant person trying to repress that book. Yet I read in the paper that psychologists are using Harry Potter because they can relate to the kids using the people in Harry Potter. Well, doesn't it bother you that all the kids that are going to psychologists read Harry Potter? That would tell me something's wrong there. But if I said, I don't want anybody reading Harry Potter, don't want my kids reading Harry Potter because it's about witches and stuff like that, all the teachers, all the intellectuals would say, that's terrible that you're keeping them from doing that. But they're forcing your kids to read Harry Potter. This is an elective, allowing somebody to read the Bible. As a matter of fact, Abington versus Shemp, the first Supreme Court case, says you should allow the Bible to be taught as literature, history, etc.
So are you telling me schools do have the option available to present that?
Absolutely. You can teach it, you can't preach it.
Okay. Let me ask you,
how do you know about the Good Samaritan? There's a whole generation of people who don't know about the Good Samaritan, they don't know about the patience of Job. How are you going to read literature if you don't have a working knowledge of
and totally independent of whatever weight you assign to the Bible, it is clearly a very strong, very old document that has served as the foundation for this nation and other nations.
Well, even the apple of your eye, the blind leading the blind. You can't read Shakespeare. You can't read any early American literature without knowing that.
What about the manger scene? Can that be displayed?
The what?
Manger scene.
Manger scene.
We're coming up on Christmas.
You got to have. They call it the plastic reindeer. You have to. If you have the manger, you have to have Santa and the plastic reindeer around it. So you can have it, but you got to have all these secular symbols. But we're not doing it at our own churches. First Presbyterian has a live manger scene, which is real good. There are some other churches that do that, but
now, of course, churches
Christmas,
are separate from the government-sponsored
right.
activities, and we need to make that clear in this, that if it's a private function, a private organization, they can pretty much do whatever they want.
Do what they want.
What we're talking about is restrictions on public facilities, public governmental services, and that is when you have these restrictions that have been set out by the courts.
Correct. But they're not as restrictive as we think. You could have a lunch Bible study at your business if you wanted to, at a government facility. But we're not doing things that we could do. For instance, this year, Thanksgiving and Christmas, all the Christian people are going to give poor people food and toys. Well, poor people can't read. We really need to be giving them books because they'll have a $150 pair of tennis shoes, a $200 starter jacket. Their kids will have the Barbie electric car that we can't afford. They get their kids stuff. They don't buy their kids books. And what we need to do is be giving them books with a good moral to the story, like the picture Bible. There's a comic book Bible. You go to any Bible bookstore, there is a Christian version of every toy you can imagine. That's what we need to be giving them. We now know that reading to children from 1 to 3 is the most important thing you can do, and poor people don't have books in their house.
Judge, I know you are very involved. In fact, you sat on the criminal court for a while.
Right, I was the drug court judge.
And you've been very involved in coming up with some new ideas. In fact, I think you've been on some national shows talking about how to deal with the problem of crime that we have here, not only in Baton Rouge and in our state, but in the entire nation. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that and what your observations are?
This is going to surprise everybody, but the government doesn't have the answer to the crime problem. We want the government to do something about crime, and it's a moral problem. The government has no solution to moral problems.
When you say a moral problem, define that for me. What do you mean?
The people that commit crime in our country are fatherless boys. They don't know how to read, and they've never been taught any morals. 95% of the guys in prison hate their father because he was either not there was there and abusive or was there and aloof, didn't give them any intellectual feedback.
Has crime increased since the 60s?
Absolutely. As the family broke down, crime went up.
And as our nation pulled away from its roots of faith, it seems like it would go hand in hand.
Well, if you have kids that have never heard don't kill, don't steal, you're going to have a problem. They have people that go teach their children how to shoplift. They have people, you saw the Kip Gullett murder. The mother of that guy said, go burn the car to get rid of the evidence. She didn't say, what a horrible thing you've done, turn yourself into the cops, which my mom would have hauled me down by the ear and turned me into the cops, There's no question about it.
So what do we do?
We've lost that. Well, the last two verses of Malachi, the last verses in the Old Testament say, send in the power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, lest I smite the land with a curse. The problem we're having is fatherless children. You'll notice crime's gone down, and everybody's taking credit for it. We built more prisons. We had harsher laws. But the states that did not have harsher laws also had crime go down. So it's got to be something else. I attribute it to people like T.D. Jakes. If you ever get a chance to watch Bishop T.D. Jakes, he started preaching manpower in the poor communities. And I went out to see his church. It's 50% men. They're all in suits. You talk to people. I used to be a former crackhead. I used to be a former burglar. They give testimonies like that, and they got saved and delivered without paying $25,000 for a drug program, and they are now responsible citizens. T.D. Jakes' church, as soon as somebody comes out of prison and they come there, they get them a job, they take care of their needs, and get them back to work. I attribute the reduction in crime to T.D. Jakes and other former crackheads. Dwight Pate here in Baton Rouge has had a big impact. There a number. Who's the guy? Lyman White's brother, Albert White, has a tremendous ministry.
What I'd like to do is let's continue this discussion on our next segment, and then let's talk about the appellate court and what your observations are there also.
All right.
This is The Legal Line with Locke Meredith. Thank you for being with us.